Can conjoined twins, Abby and Brittany Hensel, have children? Will they be mothers?
Yeah, we're gonna be moms.
There was an interview with them when they were 16 years old.
We haven't thought about how being moms is gonna work yet.
Now that Abby married Josh Bowling, the question is, will they be mothers? Abby is already a stepmom to Josh's 8-year-old daughter from a different relationship named Isabella. I'm Deanna from Hot for History. Please do subscribe. I like to talk about topics that your history teacher would never dare to teach you. So we're gonna look back in history and talk about a few different sets of conjoined twins, ones that have had children, some that haven't. Yes, there are so many more people that we could discuss, but we're gonna talk about Daisy and Violet Hilton, Chang and Eng Bunker, and Millie and Christine McKoy. All of those were sets of conjoined twins, and I think it's really interesting to talk about. 2 of those sets of twins had children. 1 didn't. Yes, it depends on what type of conjoined twin they are. Let's talk about Millie and Christine McKoy. Millie and Christine McKoy were born in 1851 into slavery. Their mother had 7 children. They weren't even a year old, and they were kidnapped to go to New Orleans. They were being exploited because the person that was sending them off to New Orleans away from their mother wanted to make some money. In 1853, they were a sideshow and exhibited for money at the North Carolina State Fair. Eventually, the people who took them away sent them all the way to England, and their mother had to go and basically fight for her rights to have her children back. In 1863, barely 10 years old, they were emancipated as slaves because of the Emancipation Proclamation. Eventually, Millie and Christine ended up having their freedom. They came back to North Carolina, but they decided at that point that they did want to make money and go off to the circus. So they performed in the circus. They were very well educated. They spoke 5 different languages. They were highly talented. They were conjoined at the hip. They talked a lot about the exploitation, obviously, in being in the circus, being kidnapped, being taken away from their parents. But these doctors thought nothing of having internal exams frequently of the women because they were so curious. Can they get married? Can they have children? And this is why I'm bringing them up, because of all of these unnecessary physical exams. They could have had children, but they opted not to. And eventually they retired from working with the circus. And when they retired from working with the circus, Millie and Christine were like, we will never, ever have these necessary or required exams again, because these doctors were examining them internally before their performances, having people pay to check them out, which was the same with Daisy and Violet Hilton. Eventually, though, these women made a lot of money, and the beautiful irony was that they were able to buy back the plantation that they were raised in with their own money for their family. Then they opened that up for tours with their childhood home. But then in 1909, the home burned down to the ground, which left them in total financial ruin. And then in 1912, they died of tuberculosis. Millie and then Christine just 12 hours later. I bring them up to just discuss this bizarre fascination that we all have. Even with Abby marrying Josh, and of course Brittany, they share everything from the waist down. They share their reproductive organs. So the big question is, like, how does that work? Josh couldn't marry 2 because it would be considered polygamy unless he was in a different state, right? But technically, they have the same stuff. Question still remains, which we'll talk more about at the end of this video, how it would work for them to have kids. Another set of conjoined twins, which were my favorite, were the highly talented Daisy and Violet Hilton. Daisy and Violet Hilton were born in 1908 to a barmaid in England. They were given up for adoption. They had to fight for their own freedom. They were known as the Hilton sisters, the Brighton twins, the Brighton conjoined twins. Same thing, always being checked out. They were attached at the hips. They had 2 separate reproductive organs, They were always checked out. People paid to be able to look up their skirts. They were highly talented. They could play different instruments. They could sing, they could dance, they could act. And they made quite a lot of money. Got a settlement back, which was $100,000 in damages, which was about $1 million. That went fast, but they continued to perform, including being in movies. And then in 1936, Violet did marry a guy named James Moore, but it was totally a publicity stunt because they sold tickets. The marriage only lasted 10 days. Daisy, however, at that time was visibly pregnant. She apparently had given up her baby, which was a boy, for adoption in 1941, and most people have never heard anything else about him. Daisy and Violet were asked, like, what do you do when the other one is like intimate with somebody? And then they're like, well, we just read a book or eat an apple. This was a case of conjoined twin women having a child naturally. Separate reproductive organs. Okay, so here's an example of some conjoined twins, Chang and Eng Bunker. Two men that were born conjoined in 1811. They were born in Thailand, which at the time was Siam. Thus, when we say Siamese twins, we're really talking about Chang and Eng Bunker. They were born in 1811, and then they ended up being this successful, very affluent sideshow in the circus because they came to America, toured, got busy, made a ton of money, were the most famous conjoined twins ever. Eventually, they both got married to sisters. They married Adelaide and Sarah Yates in 1843. Chang and Adelaide had 10 children, while Eng and Sarah had 11. There were 12 daughters and 9 boys, and none of them were twins. 2 of the children were deaf. 2 of them died from burns before they were even 3 years old. They were the first set of conjoined twins whose condition was well documented in medical records. They settled in Wilkes County, North Carolina in 1839. They worked as merchants, and then they became farmers, and they maintained separate households a mile and a half apart. How that worked, I don't know. However, little negative side, they were very successful, but they owned several slaves, including children. They were technically Confederate slaveholders, but the reason they were able to have children was because they had separate reproductive organs. There have been many conjoined twins who have had babies, but they've been separated or they've had separate reproductive organs. So let's talk about Abby and Brittany.
Yeah, we're gonna be moms.
They're 34 now. They ended up saying,
We haven't thought about how being moms is gonna work yet.
One set of reproductive organs, they share legs, they share everything from the waist down. Abby's married to Josh. There's a bunch of questions that come into play. In other words, even if they did artificial insemination and a surrogate, let's say, and they used their eggs, it would be both of their eggs technically because they only have one set. So then who's the mother? That's the big question. And then the question is, could they even try to have them naturally? Probably something that would be really complicated and really difficult. So surrogacy would probably be the best route for that to happen. My opinion is that I find them to be highly inspiring. I think if I was their mother and I had given birth to these women, I would be so proud of them. They both went off to get separate college degrees, and then they ended up sharing a job as 5th grade teachers. They're active, they're physical, they are positive and yet kind of feisty. They're really strong, and they will say things like, we're just different, but, kind of get over it. And I really appreciate that about them. And I think if they could be mothers, why not? Why not? We're talking about diversity, physical diversity here, and they may be different, but why not have children? So I am hoping that if that is something that they still want, that it actually happens. And I feel like many of us could learn some lessons from them, specifically not to let our limitations or let's say our own personal disabilities get in the way of living a full life, because they certainly haven't. Even in spite of high criticism, conjoined twins, Abby and Brittany Hensel. Let's see what happens in the future. It is interesting. They've handled it really, really well. And let's just see what happens for Brittany, Abby, and Josh in the future, remembering that they wouldn't be the first ones to have children as conjoined sisters, but it might be different. So let's see. In the meantime, I'm Deanna from Hot for History. I like to talk about quirky history that your history teacher would probably never teach you, and how current events relates to history. Please subscribe and like my videos.